This is Ken Rockwell with KenRockwell.com. Let's look at Sony's newest 20mm f1.8 full-frame ultra-wide lens. But let's not look at the lens first. Let's look at some of the pictures that I can make with this lens. First, here we have the mythical 7 Palms Oasis at dusk, f4 at 25 seconds at ISO 400. The beauty of this lens is it's f1.8, so although I've shot this at f4 so that I have enough depth of field, I'm able to do my focusing at f1.8 extremely precise, even in this very dim after sunset light. I can see with enough precision to set precise focus. So everything is exactly as I want it to be. Here's the interior of a Lincoln Continental Mark V. This is at f11 at 1/80th at ISO 50. Here's Mexican history on a Chevrolet Impala. This is made at f16 handheld at 1/6 of a second. And it's perfectly sharp with the in-body stabilization and my iron grip, again at ISO 50. I prefer ISO 50 because I get an even slightly cleaner image and I get a little more highlight contrast. So if you know how to control your lighting, it's just a little bit better. And for you newcomers to photography, you're probably freaked out by ISO 50 and various scare stories. But to be honest, I shot for decades ISO 25 and ISO 50 speed film. For me is normal. Here's a 56 Chevrolet in Nassau Blue. This is at f8 and at 2/50th, again at ISO 50. Here's a 1960 Corvette in Roman Red. Again, f8 or to 60th at ISO 50. Here's a Mountain of Stone. This is at f8, handheld again at a 25th at ISO 50, one stop of additional exposure compensation, and this lens is so super sharp. Here's a Desert Home with 2 palms, f11 at 25 seconds at ISO 200. This lens is a joy because for manual focus, for this sort of nighttime stuff, where I need to set precise depths of field between the fountain in the foreground and everything else in the background, it's so fast that even in this dark light, I can see exactly what's going on with extreme precision and extreme sharpness through the viewfinder. What I love about this lens is its compact size, its pretty good build quality, and its extreme optical performance. What really makes it stand out optically is, of course, it's sharp. I mean, every lens has been sharp for quite a while now. What really makes it extraordinary is how close it focuses and its complete lack of distortion, as well as having a dedicated metal aperture ring. I don't know about you guys, but I can set my apertures much faster with this aperture ring than trying to fiddle around in menus and a control dial and a control button. It has a plastic front filter thread of 67 millimeters. It's offshored to Thailand. It's not made domestically in Japan. A 20 millimeter is worlds different than a 24 millimeter. To me, it's like night and day. A 20 millimeter is an ultra wide. It is my favorite fixed ultra-wide focal length. I can shoot forever with a fixed 20 and a fixed 85 in my pocket, and I'm good to go. I'm not a fan of 24 millimeter lenses. They just kind of give me a wishy-washy look. It's like, well, did you want wide or did you want normal? You know, it's for everybody. Galen Roll used to shoot nothing but a 24 in a telephoto and travel the world. So we're all different. But to me, a 20 is significantly different than a 24. Let's get into the specifics of performance. Overall, it's a tough little lens with top-notch optical performance, as you've seen at the beginning. Autofocus is super fast, as we expect from ultra-wide lenses. It's not a pokey lens. Admittedly, all of Nikon Z system, at least as of 2020, is still pretty slow compared to DSLR. Sony really has the autofocus speed down. Not that that's ever been a concern with ultra-wide lenses, but it has been on some of the other mirrorless systems. Manual focus is entirely electronic. This ring is connected to nothing other than a digital encoder, which talks to the computers inside the camera that then talk back to the lens through these electronic contacts that tell the lens what to do. The beauty of it is, and in live view, open up to f1.8, you can set extremely precise manual focus. However, unlike the Nikon system, you don't always get instant manual override. You have to set the camera to the right mode, otherwise it totally ignores this manual focus ring. And that's too bad because I don't have time to set my camera modes. When I turn this, I want the lens to respond. This lens doesn't usually do that, but that's a flaw with most of the Sony system. Focus breathing is when you focus from near to far and the image changes size. This lens has a reasonable amount of focus breathing. The image from this lens gets a little bigger or a moderate amount bigger as you focus more closely. So you wouldn't be shooting dialogue between two subjects with this lens unless you're really trying to force the perspective, in which case you will get some breathing. The bokeh of this lens is excellent, and that really is another standout about this Sony lens. It's an aspherical lens, but what makes it extraordinary is Sony has a secret aspherical manufacturing process. They don't tell anybody how they do it, but they do it in such a way that the lenses are much more precisely ground than other aspherics, and it turns out they can also get some pretty good bokeh, which is absent in most other aspherical ultra-wide lenses. The other aspherical lenses usually give crummy bokeh. This lens gives really great bokeh. Here's a Thai iced tea up close. Now, the reason you see some weirdnesses and some dirt, it looks like almost in the defocus blur circles at the bottom, is because that is reflected off of a resin tabletop at my favorite Thai restaurant, in which case those are artifacts of the surface finish of the resin table. You'll notice in the background on the top and in the middle where there is no reflections from the resin table, it's just fine. Distortion is impressive. This lens really stands out because it doesn't have any visible distortion. If we go out of our way to look at a pretty sloppily constructed brick wall, it's actually flat. I love this. There really is no distortion. There's a little bit of pulling out at the far corners. And admittedly, if you want to shoot brick walls, yes, then turn on the automatic distortion correction inside your camera. But you don't need to, because admittedly, that can sometimes rob a little bit of sharpness as the camera's resampling your pixels. I would leave distortion correction off of this lens because it simply keeps the straight line straight. And if you're photographing graph paper, you're making very boring pictures. But even then, this wall is less precisely constructed than this lens has distortion. Ergonomically, the lens is great, as you've seen here. With one finger, I can set focus. With one finger, and also, too, because this is ribbed just like a Leica lens, I can feel it without looking at it. So I can set this with one fingertip. One defect is, although the ring itself is metal, the clicks feel like plastic. And they're not exactly aligned. It's kind of sloppy. It doesn't set right in like a Leica lens or a Nikon manual focus lens. It's a little off. So admittedly, I ask myself, why did they bother to put these third stop tick marks? Well, they put the third stop tick marks for when you turn the clicks off, but that's a minor thing I wish they could improve. When you set it to A, it doesn't actually give you automatic aperture control. What that really means is you set the aperture now on the camera using the front ring on your camera. I prefer to do it this way. The beauty is you can do it both ways. Fall off. There isn't any significant fall off with this lens when you shoot it on a regular camera, which automatically corrects for the fall off. As you can see here at these different apertures, the fall off is negligible. And you don't want to have completely no fall off because then the image looks a little strange and also your eyes tend to veer off towards the edges of the picture and leave the picture, which you don't want to do. If you want the fall off, which admittedly I oftentimes like because it focuses people's attention on the center of the image and prevents them from just looking off to the corners and then go looking at somebody else's picture, this is what it looks like if you turn off. In other words, if you go out of your way to turn off the lens's automatic correction. For filters, it is a standard 67 thread. What's nice is I can put not just one, but two regular filters like these Hoya HMCs that I like so much. You can put two filters stacked. There's still no vignetting at all on full frame. So you don't need to buy fancy, extra thin polarizers or graduated neutral densities. Here's a hint though. Be very careful trying to use a polarizer in an ultra-wide lens. It usually doesn't work because what you're trying to do, make the sky darker and emphasize the clouds, well, the sky's polarization changes with angle. The polarization completely disappears or gets completely stronger when you look across a 90-degree angle in the sky. This lens covers about that angle. So you'll get one part of the sky really dark, another part of the sky really light. You'll see a band across the sky with a polarizer. That's just the way the Earth is made. So you usually don't want to use a polarizer in ultra-wide lenses. Just be careful. For flare and ghost, we'll cover that under sun stars. This is a moderate amount of flare and ghost, which is probably a good thing because when I shoot an ultra-wide shot and I have the sun in the image, I'd like to get some little sparkles across the image, which sort of emphasizes how bright is the sun. This is fairly normal. It's a little more than I'm used to seeing in modern lenses. It usually makes flare and ghost completely go away and remove all character from the lenses and just make them laboratory exactly precise. This lens, as you'll see a little bit later when I get up to sun stars, it is a moderate amount of flare and ghost. And guess what? If you don't want the flare and the ghosts, I don't even bother using those little throwaway plastic hoods that come with it. I just hold, let's say, for my lighting here, you see, I'll just put my hand in the way and keep the light from shining in my lens when I'm shooting. There are no lateral color fringes as shot at the default settings of this camera, which automatically correct. And if you go out of your way to turn off the automatic correction, there is just a microscopic, barely visible amount of green magenta fringing off in the corners. which I only see on my 60 megapixel A7R Mark IV. And again, if you're looking for that, just leave the lateral color correction turned on, which is where the camera comes, and all is good. For lens corrections, my A7R Mark IV offers corrections for distortion, lateral color, and fall off. By default, lateral color and fall off are automatically corrected, and distortion is turned off. I wouldn't turn on distortion unless I was doing nothing but architectural photography, because the lens is so completely devoid of distortion as it is, except for the furthest corners. It won't make much of a change, but it could make a slight change, admittedly in your imagination, because all of these corrections do resample the pixels a little bit. Macro performance is outstanding. Look how close it gets. And this is an ultra-wide lens. So this is extraordinarily close performance for an ultra-wide lens. But then look how sharp it is. And know that this was shot at f1.8 wide open, where most lenses get a little softer, and especially most lenses get a lot softer, all the way up at the closest focusing distance, wide open, which is really a very strange corner of the envelope over which you shoot. So most lenses don't shoot this well. Even your 51.8 isn't this sharp. I'm really impressed at this. Not that I would ever use this for macro, but by all means, the fact that this lens can go to these crazy ends of the performance envelope and not get soft just says, hey, it's the year 2020 and optics are extraordinary. Mechanically, this is typical for an offshore lens. It's made in Thailand. The front filter ring is plastic. I wish it was metal. This identity ring is actually metal and engraved and painted, so that's nice. This trim ring here is metal. The mount bayonet for the hood is the same plastic as the filter threads. This focus ring is plastic with rubber on top. This barrel here is plastic. These slide switches and this programmable function button are all plastic. Nice thing about this programmable function button is it by default is focus lock, which is super handy and the way I leave it set. But at least in my A7R Mark IV, and I have the instructions for this at my written review, to which I link down in the description or at the end card, you can program this. You have 27 pages of options for what you can program this button to do in an A7R Mark IV. And of course, different cameras will have different things. Again, these slide switches, these are all plastic. This ring here, this aperture selection ring, is metal, which feels really nice. It feels like the clicks are plastic, as I said before. This rear barrel is plastic. This mount is metal. This ring here is plastic. The internals seem to be mostly plastic. This is engraved in the front. This ring is engraved. This is debossed. This is nice. These markings are painted. Sad thing is, the serial number is just a crummy little sticker, which is going to fall off. And if it doesn't fall off, it's going to wear off. This is not the way to serialize a lens. Canon does it right by engraving it inside the mount, where no one's going to screw with it or peel it off. The reason to watch out for this is I've had people write me who have a pro lens. In this case, they had a pro $2,000 Nikon lens that did things the wrong way like this. And they shoot it for a living. They beat the heck out of their lens. And the sticker, of course, falls off. So when they sent it to Nikon for service, Nikon said, sorry, we can't service it. The serial number's been removed. He's like, I didn't remove it. You guys put it on crappy and it came off. Well, I don't approve of that, but too bad. I'm a bit of an old timer and I expect my lenses to last forever. Today, these lenses are throwaways. In fact, does it have a throwaway symbol on here? No, it does not have the little recycling symbol with the 10 in the middle, meaning you're supposed to throw it away after 10 years. In any case, this is a little better than average for what we get today. Sharpness, of course, as I've said, is superb. And pretty much all lenses today in 2020 that come out are perfectly sharp. They're sharper than the cameras that are out there and sharper than most photographers' ability to make pictures. But here is an acid test. These are palm trees. This is shot wide open at f1.8 in broad daylight, which is something nobody does because lenses are usually quite soft. But you'll see here this image, and I hope you're watching this on real 4K television where you can see some of the sharpness. These lenses are far sharper than you can see in 4K, and most of you are probably only watching in HD on your phones. But by all means, go to your home theater, get your 4K TV hooked up, however you get 4K to your television, and watch this. In any case, even at f1.8, this is super sharp all the way out to the corners. In the laboratory, admittedly, it's a little bit softer at f1.8 in the far corners at 60 megapixels. I don't think you're ever going to see this. And I also wonder, because it has a character to it that almost suggests that it's a problem with the interface to the sensor in terms of the angle of incidence of the light in the corners, like when you shoot a rangefinder lens adapted to a mirrorless camera. But in any case, it's minor and it sharpens right up as soon as you stop it down. And so I have no flaw with that. There is no stabilization in this lens. It's going to depend on your in-camera stabilization if you need it. And here's something to watch out for. In-camera stabilization is inferior for use with ultra-wide lenses. The problem is the center of the image looks great, and the stabilization is actually fantastic with an ultra wide. The problem is that towards the corners of your image, the effective image gets stretched out a little bit. So as you're moving the lens, the image actually moves more pixels in the corners than it does in the middle. Well, that's fine. If you have an optically stabilized lens, it just locks the whole image down. With the censorship stabilization system, the problem is for every pixel at the center moves, you want to move the outsides of the image, maybe a pixel and a half or even 2 pixels with some of these lenses. It doesn't do that. The sensor's not made of rubber. So what all this gobbledygook means is if you're seeing soft results in your corners in dim light where the stabilization system is doing a good job of stabilizing the center, it can't stabilize the corners. So the corners will tend to be less stabilized and look blurrier. It's not a lens defect, it's a defect in how sturdily you're holding your camera. Go take some rifle shooting or handgun shooting lessons and learn how to hold your camera properly. Learn how to release the shutter, learn your breathing, learn a smooth trigger pull, and that is critical to getting sharp results at slow shutter speeds with any kind of camera, stabilized or not. Sun stars. This lens makes great sun stars. Here we are. I'm going to go through all the various apertures, but first, here's the kind of thing you'd want it to do. Here's a black Shelby Cobra in daylight, nice and shiny. This is shot at f/22, and you get these huge sun stars, which are probably even more than I need. But let's go look at each aperture now. Wide open, there are no sun stars, and just blotted out here. f/2.8, not much. f/4. As you start stopping down, you'll see more and more sun stars. Of course, as we get to the smallest apertures, you see some really large sun stars. They're not that sharp and they're not that diffuse. It's about reasonable. I think that's great. It's a great compromise. I don't agree with having rounded blades and lenses. It does not change the bokeh, but it does soften the sun stars. This looks just great. With this lens, I can stop it down and I can get my sun stars, so I'm a happy camper. Let's compare it to some other lenses. Now, I already mentioned 24 millimeters versus 20. To me, it's a huge difference. 24 is kind of a wishy-washy. It's not all that ultra-wide. It's not all that normal. Why would I want it? Well, some people want it, some people don't. I love 21 and 20 millimeter lenses. 24 millimeter lens, as in Sony's 24 millimeter f1.4 GM, I don't see as being that exciting. I would buy this lens. I would not buy the 24, but that's your personal choice. In any case, don't say that this is just a ho-hum lens. This, to me, is night and day different creatively than a 24. Something a little different between these two lenses, the 24-1.4 and this 20-1.8, is that this 20 millimeter lens focuses much more closely and gets a much tighter macro ratio than the 24-1.4. Although the 24-1.4 costs a lot more and says GM on it, I see no difference in the mechanics. They both have plastic front rings. They're both made of exactly the same materials. They both have metal aperture rings. To me, they seem identical. I think it's just a marketing scheme trying to extract more money for the 24-1.4. Versus the Sony and Zeiss 16 to 35 millimeter lenses, those lenses are much larger and much slower than this lens. So they're actually for different purposes. I was never that much of a fan of the Zeiss 16 to 35 f4. It wasn't as super sharp as the other lenses. And the Sony 16 to 35 2.8 weighs literally twice as much as this lens. They're for different applications. Don't bring both with you if you're ever traveling around. Pick one. Don't use both. Versus, say, using a Leica 21 millimeter lens and an adapter, this lens is going to be sharper on the Sony camera. While the Leica lenses, of course, are the world's sharpest lenses, the question is they don't interface well to mirrorless sensors in the corners with ultra-wide lenses because the optics and the rear nodal point positioning is different and not optimized for mirrorless cameras. So if you're shooting this on your Sony, this is going to give you sharper pictures than anything from Leica on an adapter. How to use this lens? This button here you can program depending on your camera. On the A7R Mark IV, I go to Menu, Camera 2, page 9 of 12. I set the custom key option, and then I have to go to page 4 of 4 to get to set the function of this button. But if you can make it there, and again, feel free to back up this video and play that again. Menu, Camera 2, page 9 of 12, custom key, page 4 of 4, 27 pages of options to program this thing. Good luck. I love that feature. This switch here is fairly simple. In autofocus, it's autofocus. Manual focus locks out autofocus and forces it into manual focus. No news there. The clicks I covered, I leave the clicks on. Or you can turn them off for video. Overall, I love this lens. It's one of the few fixed lenses that I love to own. I love it because it's fast. I can grab this lens and a long zoom, and I am set to do anything. I can grab this lens and fixed 85 millimeter, and I'm set to do anything. The key is you never need to cover every focal length. You don't need a 16 to 35. This fulfills the ultra-wide end of the range. I don't use front caps. I use an ultraviolet filter. I simply use the ultraviolet filter, screw it on there, throw it in my bag. I don't throw it in the bag where it's going to bang into anything, which would be bad, but just in a soft bag or even in my pocket, if there's no other things in that pocket, this is all I need. As soon as I pull this lens out, I am ready to shoot. I don't have to worry about trying to take my cap off or missing a shot. I have links for the various filters I'd recommend. The key about filters is, if you want to get a fantastic filter like the Hoya HD3s, which are both bulletproof, scratch-proof, thumbprint-proof, this is not one of those. Yes, they're expensive, but filters last forever. Given 5 or 10 years, you're going to chuck this lens and get whatever the latest, greatest thing is. I have filters that I've been using since I was a little kid back in the 1970s. If you buy good filters, they never wear out. So don't cheap out on your filter. And that's it. Thanks for watching Ken Rockwell, kenrockwell.com and kenrockwell.tv. That's my thoughts on this wonderful new Sony f1.8 20mm G lens for full-frame cameras. I will catch you next time. Again, you can get full information at kenrockwell.com. Thanks again for watching kenrockwell.tv.